The Hardest Goodbye. The rain fell gently over Cedar Falls, Iowa. On an October morning in 1994, 19-year-old Emily Carter sat alone in the maternity ward, cradling a tiny baby wrapped in a blue hospital blanket. His eyes were barely open, his tiny fingers wrapped around hers as if he already knew she was slipping away. She whispered through tears, "I'm so sorry. I love you more than you'll ever know." She kissed his forehead one last time. The nurse gently placed a folder in front of her. "Whenever you're ready." Emily stared at the adoption papers for nearly 20 minutes. Every signature felt like it erased a piece of her heart. She wasn't giving him away because she didn't love him. She was giving him away because she loved him enough to believe someone else could give him the life she couldn't. Her parents had thrown her out after discovering she was pregnant. The baby's father had disappeared before she was 5 months along. She had no money, no home, no future, only love. And sometimes she had learned love meant letting go. Before the social worker carried the baby away, Emily slipped something into the blanket, a tiny silver locket. Inside was a miniature photograph of herself holding him only minutes after his birth. Folded behind the picture was a handwritten note. "If you ever wonder whether your mother loved you, the answer is yes. Every single day, she never learned who adopted him." The adoption was closed. She walked out of Mercy Hospital with empty arms. For years afterward, every October 18th, she baked a small birthday cake. She lit one candle. She whispered, "Happy birthday, sweetheart, wherever you are." Then she blew out the candle alone. 30 years passed. Life slowly rebuilt itself. Emily became a librarian in a quiet town outside Des Moines. She never married, never had another child. Friends asked why. She always smiled politely. "I already have a son." No one understood. Every birthday she wrote him another letter. 30 letters. She placed each one inside a wooden box in her closet. Letters he would probably never read. She imagined him constantly. Was he kind? Did he like baseball? Did he laugh loudly? Did he hate vegetables like she did? Was he happy? Sometimes she would notice a man around 30 walking through the library. For one impossible second, she'd wonder, could that be him? Then she'd shake her head. Impossible. Closed adoptions stayed closed. Or so she believed. Meanwhile, nearly 900 miles away in Boston, 30-year-old Daniel Brooks stood in the attic of the home where he'd grown up. His adoptive parents, Michael and Susan Brooks, had recently celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. They had always been honest. "You were adopted." They never hid it. They never treated him differently. They loved him fiercely. But there had always been one unanswered question. Who was she? Not because he wanted another family. He already had one. He simply wanted to know where his smile came from. Who gave him his green eyes? Why every year around his birthday he felt strangely emotional. As Daniel packed old boxes, one slipped from the shelf. Inside was a small envelope labeled, "For Daniel, when you're ready." His hands trembled. Inside lay the adoption documents. Most of the pages were blacked out. But tucked beneath them was something unexpected. A hospital inventory sheet. It listed one personal item left with the infant. Silver heart locket. Daniel frowned. "What locket?" He had never seen one. Confused, he carried the paperwork downstairs. His mother looked startled. "I thought that was lost." "What locket?" Susan's face turned pale. "The agency told us it had accidentally been misplaced before we brought you home." Daniel stared silently. "The only thing your birth mother left never reached you." Something inside him shifted. If she'd left something, maybe she had wanted him to know she loved him. For the first time in his life, Daniel decided to look for her. He had no idea that at that very moment, 900 miles away, Emily was placing a tiny birthday cake on her kitchen table, lighting one candle, and whispering through tears, "Happy 30th birthday, my beautiful boy." She had no idea. Someone was finally looking for her. On the other side of the country, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the missing silver locket. For 30 years, he had believed his adoption story was complete. His parents had loved him unconditionally, and he had never doubted that. But now one question echoed through his mind. Why would a mother leave a keepsake if she didn't hope her child would one day know how much he was loved? That night, he sat at the kitchen table with his wife, Rachel, while their 8-year-old daughter. Lily, colored pictures nearby? I think I need to find her, Daniel said quietly. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'll support you no matter what. Just remember, you aren't replacing anyone. You're simply searching for another piece of your story. Daniel smiled, grateful for the family who had always stood beside him. The next morning, he called the adoption agency. A woman named Karen answered. I'm looking for information about my birth mother. Karen explained that many state laws had changed over the years, making reunions possible if both parties agreed. We can't promise anything, she said gently. But we can begin a mutual consent search. Daniel filled out every form they requested. He submitted a DNA test. He uploaded his family history. Then he waited. Days turned into weeks. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart raced. Every email made him wonder if this would finally be the one. Meanwhile, Emily's life continued as it always had. She shelved books, helped children find stories, recommended novels to retirees. Everyone in town knew her as the cheerful librarian with the warm smile. No one knew about the wooden box hidden in her bedroom closet. On quiet evenings, she often opened it. 30 birthday letters, 30 Christmas cards, 30 Mother's Days spent wondering if her son was happy. She never mailed a single one. There was nowhere to send them. One Saturday afternoon, Emily's neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, stopped by with fresh apple pie. You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else, the elderly woman said. Don't you ever think about retiring? Emily smiled softly. Maybe someday. And children? Emily looked toward the window. I had one. Mrs. Henderson had heard those words before, but she never asked questions. Some wounds deserved silence. 3 weeks later, Daniel received a phone call. His hands shook as he answered. Mr. Brooks? Yes? This is Karen from the adoption agency. Daniel held his breath. We've located someone who may be your birth mother. His knees nearly gave out. She's alive? Yes. Tears filled his eyes before he even realized he was crying. Karen continued carefully. We've contacted her. She was completely surprised. What did she say? There was a brief pause. She cried. Daniel closed his eyes. For 30 years, he had imagined hundreds of possibilities. Maybe she had forgotten him. Maybe she never wanted to hear from him again. Maybe she regretted everything. But crying. That wasn't what he expected. Karen smiled on the other end of the phone. Her first words were, Is he happy? Daniel couldn't speak. His throat tightened. She didn't ask what you did for a living. She didn't ask if you were successful. She didn't ask why you were searching. She only asked if you were happy. A tear rolled down Daniel's cheek. I am, Karen replied softly. I'll tell her. When Emily received the agency's phone call earlier that day, she had nearly dropped the phone. Mrs. Carter, someone believes he may be your biological son. For a moment, the room spun. She gripped the kitchen counter to keep from falling. Is he okay? Yes. Is he healthy? Yes. Is he happy? The counselor smiled. He has a wonderful family. Emily covered her mouth and sobbed. For 30 years, that had been her only prayer. Not that he would find her. Not that he would forgive her. Only that he would have a good life. When she finally calmed down, the counselor asked, Would you be willing to exchange letters before deciding whether to meet? Emily didn't hesitate. Yes. That evening, she unlocked the wooden box. She looked at the 30 letters she'd written over the years. Instead of choosing one of them, she pulled out a blank sheet of paper. She wanted her first real letter to be written for the man he had become. Not the baby she had lost. She began to write, Dear Daniel, I don't know if I have the right to call myself your mother. Someone else earned that title by raising you. But I have loved you every single day since the moment you were born. Not one birthday passed without thinking of you. Not one Christmas morning began without wondering what gifts made you smile. If giving you away caused you pain, I'm deeply sorry. I only hoped it would give you the life I couldn't. Her tears blurred the ink. She folded the letter carefully. As she sealed the envelope, she whispered, "I hope you'll understand." 3 days later, Daniel opened his mailbox. Inside was a single cream-colored envelope. Written in elegant handwriting were the words, "To Daniel, with all my love." His hands trembled so badly he could barely open it. He had waited 30 years for this moment, and he had no idea that the last page of the letter contained a secret, one that would change everything he believed about his adoption. Daniel sat alone on the back porch after everyone had gone to bed. The envelope rested in his hands. For nearly 10 minutes, he simply stared at it. This wasn't just a letter. It was 30 years of unanswered questions folded into 3 pieces of paper. Finally, he unfolded the pages. The first words blurred through his tears. "Dear Daniel, if you're reading this, then God has answered a prayer I stopped believing would ever come true." Emily wrote about the day he was born. She described his tiny fingers, the way he stopped crying when she sang softly, and the impossible decision she had made. She never blamed anyone. Not her parents. Not his father. Not life. She simply wrote, "I was too young, too frightened, and too alone. But I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." Daniel wiped away tears as he read. Then he reached the final page. Tucked behind it was a faded photograph. A young woman, barely 19, smiled through tears as she held a newborn wrapped in a blue blanket. On the back, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Our first and only picture together." A lump formed in Daniel's throat. He had spent his whole life wondering if anyone had ever held him, before his adoptive parents. Now he knew. Someone had. Someone who loved him enough to let him go. But there was something else inside the envelope. A copy of a hospital inventory record. Next to one item, Emily had written in blue ink, "I left you a silver heart locket. The agency told me you would receive it. I only recently learned it never reached you." Daniel stared at the page. The missing locket. The one his adoptive parents had never seen. He couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, he called Karen at the adoption agency. "Is there any chance the locket still exists?" Karen sighed. "I honestly don't know. Records from the 1990s weren't always handled well. But I'll check every archived file." "I'd really appreciate it." "I understand," she said gently. "Sometimes it's not about the object. It's about knowing someone cared enough to leave it." A week later, Emily received Daniel's first letter. She carried it into her garden before opening it. She wanted to read it where the sunlight felt warm. His handwriting was steady. "Dear Emily, thank you for telling me the truth." She paused, afraid of what came next. Instead, she found kindness. "I want you to know something immediately. I don't blame you." Emily covered her mouth. For years, she had imagined anger, resentment, questions she couldn't answer. Instead, he wrote, "Because of your sacrifice, I grew up with parents who loved me deeply. I had birthday parties, little league games, college graduation, and a family of my own." A tear landed on the page. Then she read the sentence that broke her heart in the best possible way. "Everything good in my life began with the hardest decision you ever made." Emily cried until the ink blurred. Over the next 2 months, they exchanged letter after letter. They learned small things about one another. Daniel loved hiking. Emily loved gardening. Both preferred chocolate ice cream over vanilla. Both collected old books. Both laughed too loudly at corny jokes. The similarities felt almost unbelievable. One evening, Daniel's adoptive father, Michael, sat beside him. "You've been smiling more lately." Daniel nodded. "I finally understand." "Understand what?" "My birth mother didn't abandon me." Michael smiled gently. "No. She loved me enough to break her own heart." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "I've always hoped you'd realize that." Then Michael stood and disappeared into the garage. A few minutes later, he returned carrying a worn cardboard box. "I've been saving this." Daniel looked puzzled. Michael opened it. Inside were dozens of photographs from his childhood. School plays, fishing trips, birthdays, Christmas mornings. Michael placed them into Daniel's hands. "I think she deserves to see these." Daniel couldn't hold back his tears. For 30 years, one mother had wondered if her son was happy. Now another mother and father wanted to show her that he had been loved. Every single day, Emily wept when the package arrived. She spent hours looking through every photograph. At 5 years old, missing his front teeth. At 12, holding a baseball trophy. At 18, wearing a graduation cap. At 25, standing beside Rachel on their wedding day. And finally, a family portrait. Daniel stood with his wife and their little daughter, Lily. Emily gently touched Lily's smiling face. "I'm a grandmother." She whispered the words as though they were too precious to say aloud. A few days later, Daniel called Emily for the very first time. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then Emily whispered, "I've imagined your voice for 30 years. Daniel smiled through tears. "I've imagined yours too." They talked for nearly 3 hours. About books, life, favorite meals, family traditions. And before hanging up, Daniel asked the question both of them had been quietly avoiding. "Would you like to meet?" Emily closed her eyes. For 30 years, she had dreamed of hearing those words. But now that the moment had finally arrived, she was terrified. After a long silence, she answered softly, "Yes." Neither of them knew that someone else had been searching through old hospital archives, and within days, a small velvet pouch would be discovered, containing the silver heart locket that had been lost for 3 decades. 3 weeks later, Emily stood in front of the hallway mirror, smoothing the wrinkles from her light blue sweater for what felt like the 100th time. She wasn't preparing for a date. She wasn't expecting a guest. She was about to meet the son she had last held as a newborn. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. On the kitchen table sat a fresh apple pie she'd baked that morning. Beside it was the wooden box containing 30 birthday letters she had written but never mailed. She wasn't sure if she'd have the courage to show him. Meanwhile, Daniel and his wife, Rachel, drove slowly through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls. Their daughter, Lily, sat in the back seat clutching a bouquet of sunflowers. "Daddy," she asked softly, "is Grandma Emily nervous?" Daniel smiled. "I think she probably is. I'm nervous too." Rachel reached back and squeezed Lily's hand. "Sometimes the happiest moments make us nervous." As they turned onto Maple Street, Daniel's heartbeat quickened. House number 214, a white porch, blue shutters, a swing gently moving in the summer breeze. For 30 years, he had imagined this moment. Nothing had prepared him for how real it felt. Inside the house, Emily heard a car door close. Then another. She looked through the lace curtains. A tall man stepped out of a dark SUV. His smile, his green eyes, his way of tilting his head. She gasped. He looked so much like her late father that her knees nearly gave out. Another woman stepped out. Then a little girl with bright eyes and a bouquet of flowers. Emily placed one trembling hand over her heart. There was a soft knock. 1, 2, 3 gentle taps. The sound she'd unknowingly waited 30 years to hear. She opened the door. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel looked at the woman before him. Older than the girl in the photograph. Her hair now streaked with silver. But the same warm eyes, the same gentle smile. "Hi," he whispered. Emily's lips trembled. "Hello, Daniel." Tears filled both their eyes. "I've wanted to say your name my whole life." Daniel stepped forward. "So have I." Without another word, they embraced. 30 years of questions. 30 years of birthdays spent apart. 30 years of wondering. All disappeared in a single hug. Neither wanted to let go. Rachel quietly wiped away tears. Little Lily looked up at her mother. "Mom." "Yes? Why are they crying if they're happy?" Rachel smiled. "Because sometimes happiness carries 30 years of waiting." Lily nodded as if that made perfect sense. Then she walked toward Emily. "I brought these for you." She held out the sunflowers. Emily knelt carefully. "They're beautiful." "I'm Lily." Emily smiled through tears. "I know." Lily hugged her without hesitation. "Hi, Grandma." Emily closed her eyes. The word she'd never expected to hear echoed in her heart. "Grandma." She hugged Lily tightly. "Thank you." Inside the house, they spent hours talking, looking through old photographs, laughing, crying, sharing stories. Emily finally brought out the wooden box. "I've been saving something." Daniel opened it slowly. Inside were 30 birthday letters. One for every year of his life. The first was dated October 18th, 1995. The last had been written only months before. Daniel opened the earliest one. Happy first birthday, sweetheart. I hope someone kissed your forehead today the way I wish I could. Another letter read, Happy 10th birthday. Maybe you're playing baseball. Maybe you're learning piano. Whatever you're doing, I hope you're laughing. Another. Happy 21st birthday. I hope you're surrounded by people who remind you every day that you're loved. Daniel couldn't hold back his tears. You never forgot. Emily shook her head. Not even for one day. Just then the doorbell rang. It was Karen from the adoption agency. She carried a small velvet pouch. I thought you might want this delivered in person. Emily looked confused. Karen smiled. Our archives were recently moved to a new storage facility. She handed the pouch to Daniel. Inside lay a tiny silver heart locket. Time had tarnished its surface, but it was unmistakably beautiful. Emily gasped, covering her mouth. I thought it was gone forever. Daniel opened the locket carefully. Inside was the tiny photograph of a young mother holding her newborn son. Folded behind it was a tiny note. The paper had yellowed with age, but the words remained clear. If you ever wonder whether your mother loved you, the answer is yes. Every single day. Silence filled the room. Daniel looked at Emily with tears streaming down his face. I never had to wonder. He placed the locket around his neck. It finally found its way home. Emily smiled through happy tears. I think it always knew where it belonged. That evening, as the sun set over Cedar Falls, 3 generations sat together on the front porch, talking, laughing, making memories that would never have existed if one young mother hadn't made the hardest decision of her life, and if one grown son hadn't chosen to knock on a stranger's door. Sometimes love isn't measured by the years spent together. Sometimes it's measured by the years someone never stopped loving you. The end. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what this reunion meant to you. Your support helps us bring more heartwarming stories to life.